guys? It's John McNamara, host, Ron in Vegas. We're talking local sports, business, real estate. If you guys like what you see, like, subscribe, hit us up on Instagram, Run in Vegas. And today we got a special guest, Ilan Acherman, attorney at Abrams and Mayo. Thanks for being on, man.
Thanks for having me. That was a cool intro.
Thank you. Yeah,
I like it.
Gotta get hypey in the beginning, right?
Yeah. I wasn't expecting that. That was cool. I like the intro picture you got going. The colors. That's
Thank
good
you.
stuff.
Yeah, gotta keep the energy. I always try to get the guests so they kind of laugh or like kind of get a little rise out of it. So I appreciate the feedback.
I'm liking it. Cool. This is my first podcast, like I was telling you. So cut me some slack. Don't raise me too hard.
No, we can't cut slack on this podcast.
Okay. All right. I'm ready for it.
Well, thanks for being on. Excited to have you. So tell us about you, your story, where you're from, how'd you get into your field.
Sure. At this point, the story is getting longer and longer as I'm getting older and older. Yeah. But originally, Colombia, South America, born there. My family moved out to the U.S. when I was, 5, 6 years old. Lived in Southern Cal for a while. Lived in Canada for a little while with my family. Oh, wow. Ended up coming to Vegas for college, and I remember at the time they called it UNLV, University of Never Leaving Vegas, and that turned out to be true. I love it here. I've never felt so comfortable, so at home anywhere. What is that? Since 2002, so 22 years now. Wow. Vegas is definitely home at this point.
So you're a real local.
I guess at this point, yeah. Definitely local.
Yeah, you've seen it all, the ups and downs here in the last, 25 years.
Yep, those steak and eggs at the casinos went from $1.99 when I was in college to, I don't know that you can get a meal here for less than $20 anymore.
Can't get a beer for less than $20 here anymore.
Yep. But it's been a blast. I ended up after college in law school, and from there I did an externship at the RJC with Judge Miley. Loved it. She ended up recommending me. So after I graduated, I went and worked for a family court judge, Judge Pomeranz. Okay. Started working in family law at that point, spent a year there, and when I left, I've been essentially working in family law since then. Divorce, custody, minor guardianships, that kind of stuff. Everything all other attorneys want to shy away from because it's hard work. I do it, and I tend to think I'm pretty darn good at it.
That's great. How long have you been doing it for?
13 years, going on 14 now.
Wow.
Yeah. It's weird because you think about it and it's like law school was just a couple of years ago, but no, it's been 13 years, 14 years since I graduated, really. Yeah.
So talk to me more about that, because you kind of said it's a hard, to be an attorney, I'm assuming is hard in general, but like you said, in this particular field of what you study and you work on, it's harder than others, and most people don't want to do it. So tell me a little bit more about that and the process of, being that type of attorney.
Sure. Look, the law in general is stressful because any mistake you make in any area of law could ruin someone's life. It could ruin someone's business. And all of that is true for family law, except in family law, you can also ruin someone's family. Mm-hmm. You can really hurt kids if you're not doing things well. And so you have all of that personal stress. You don't want to mess up because you can really hurt other people. You're also addressing your client's emotional needs a lot. My part is 85% attorney and legal advisor, and 15 to 20% therapist. You're talking to clients, and inevitably, they want to address their concerns, their emotional concerns. The toughest things a person goes through in life is the death of a loved one and the divorce. That's essentially the death of your family, right? It's incredibly difficult, incredibly difficult. It's incredibly difficult when all you're dealing with is just a husband and wife that are divorcing, and if anyone's gone through a breakup, it's not easy. Right? It's incredibly tough, even a breakup or relationship that's lasted a year or two. Now, throw on top of those emotional issues, throw on top of that the fact that you're dividing up property and assets and debts, and your livelihood is at stake. And if someone has been a stay-at-home wife, how is that person going to support themselves? If someone is working and, while they were married, they were working hard and they were just kind of making ends meet, and now they're separating, and the court is saying, well, now you're going to have to pay some alimony for a period of time. Well, there's a difficulty there too as the payer of, well, how am I going to make ends meet while also helping to support this other person in two different households? So those things are really difficult and emotional. Now throw on top of that this layer of what happens with the kids. And now you're dealing with the kids' emotions. And sometimes kids, they say they don't want to go with one parent or another. What's a parent supposed to do about that if there's a court order that says you have to tell them to go, right? Yeah. All of these things we deal with on a daily basis. There is no rule for each one of those things. There are plenty of rules for a lot of things, but for 70, 80% of the things that come up on a day-to-day basis, there's no rule book that I can point to say, this is what you need to do in this situation. It's tough. It's tough.
Seems like it.
I enjoy it. I like how difficult it is. I like helping people. And at the end of the day, you see someone who started off stressed out and they say, thank you. Man, that was so tough. And thanks for helping me out with that. But there's a reason why there's not an overabundance of family law attorneys because it's tough.
Yeah. It's you said like you're a therapist 20% of the time. I kind of think like that's real estate, but I feel like I'm a therapist 90% of the time and real estate 10% of the time. Yeah. So I can relate to you on that. And divorce is obviously very serious. So tell me more. Do you give any advice before folks start going down this road of divorce? Do you even give any advice and maybe talk about a little bit how alimony works? Is it different in different states, or if you can kind of...
The first piece of advice, take a deep breath. It's going to be all right. You're going to get through it, and you're going to come out the other side, and it's going to be fine. Things will get figured out. Keep that in mind, because you're going to go through sometimes a year and a half of intense litigation. Keep in mind that it will end, and you're gonna come out of it eventually. You're gonna come out of it. And look, there's a reason folks are getting divorced, and it's not because they're in a happy marriage, right? 100% of divorces start from an unhappy marriage, and so you might as well end it. And it's going to take a little bit of time to sift all these things out, but take a breath, because you're going to get there. I have a feeling you probably do the same thing when you're going through selling a house, dealing with, an offer that falls through, or not getting offers for, a few weeks and people stressed out. What do you tell people? Like, hey, relax, stay on board, don't cut and run suddenly, right? It's similar. This is going to end. You know that there's an end point. You've done this. I don't know, how long have you been in real estate?
20 years. I'm a dinosaur in real estate, Elon. Basically.
And in Vegas real estate, I gotta imagine you've definitely seen it all. The ups and downs over the past 20 years have been intense here, right?
We sure have. Yeah, I definitely have, and I can totally relate, especially like just this year, because sales are actually down. It's the least amount of sales that we have seen in like 25 years. Really? I wouldn't say it was as bad as 2011, because the prices were a lot higher now, right? But it is. I can understand on some level, because it's a lot of mindset for our clients and keeping them positive and keeping them moving forward. And sometimes they just want somebody to listen to, and and sometimes you're that emotional bag here and there,
Yeah.
punching bag sometimes, but as I'm sure you can relate.
Oh, 100%, 100%. And you asked me about alimony, and that's one of the toughest things that people on both sides get upset about, and they don't know how they're going to get through it because they, either if you're going to be paying, right, is the other side asking for something that's so high that now you're wondering, well, how am I going to afford my own life, right? Or if you're on the other side, let's say that stay-at-home wife, stay-at-home mom for 20 years, and now you're getting divorced, and suddenly the other side is saying, I don't want to pay you a dime. Well, how are you going to support yourself, right? After so long of being out of the workforce, you're unlikely to get right back out there and start earning a ton of cash. Yeah. So, what do we look at? In states like California, my understanding, and I'm not a California attorney, but my understanding is they have this nice little calculator where they plug in numbers, how long were you married, what is your income, things like that.
Okay.
And they spit out a number and easy peasy. We don't have that here.
Okay.
We have a series of factors under NRS 125.150 subsection 9. We have a series of factors that the court has to weigh and balance. Or we're not going to go through all of them. There's a lot of factors. But it's things like, what are the parties' relative incomes? That's one of the major things. How long have the parties been married? The court also looks at, did one party or the other increase their income, their experience during the marriage? So, if because I'm working and I have my wife, let's say, at home with the kids, and so I'm able to put in all these extra hours at work and show my boss that I'm so good, and maybe I'm able to have time because my wife is taking care of the house and kids, I'm able to take the time to get extra training that increases my earning capacity and things like that.
Yeah.
The court takes that into account because that's worth something, and I was only able to do that because my wife stayed at home, and so to some extent, my wife should get some credit for that increased earning capacity that was earned during the marriage. A case came down recently from the Supreme Court, Kogod v. Sioufi Kogod. Essentially, the court looks at two things, and all of the factors should point to one of these two things. Whether there was any economic loss that was faced by the person asking for alimony, right? Did they forego their own education? Did they forego their own career opportunities in order to stay at home? And then you also look at the need and ability to pay. So does the person asking for alimony have a need for alimony, first of all, right? If they're independently wealthy and have $1 billion in the bank, the court is probably not going to award alimony to that person. At the same time, if the person that they're asking for money from doesn't have any money, they're not employed, something along those lines, they're unemployable, well, the court's not going to award alimony. And so the need versus ability to pay is one of the factors. The economic loss is another factor. And then we take all of the factors from the statute, kind of plug them into those two, try to weigh and balance everything to come up with something that is at least equitable. It used to be, and I remember there's a quick and dirty calculation we can look at when we're first looking at the case.
Okay.
Sort of, if it's a long-term marriage, half the term of the marriage, and we try to sort of equalize the parties' incomes a little bit, right? But that doesn't actually hold true. All of those factors, it's very case dependent what you're looking at. So
Interesting.
Yeah, the longer the marriage, the more likely the alimony is. The higher the discrepancy in the parties' incomes, the more likely and the more alimony you're likely to see, and you can kind of look at it that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this process, you say, could take anywhere from a year and a half, potentially?
So I would say if it's fully contested, between 6 months up to 2 years in the worst of cases.
Okay.
It's rare that we see a case last 2 years. Those cases usually involve hotly contested custody issues. Or if there's a financial gamesmanship, hiding of assets and things like that. So in rare cases, 2 years. A lot of cases, 6 months, a year.
Okay.
If it's fully contested, you're probably looking at about a year. Yeah.
It's so interesting that it's so different than California, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing, but it's probably even more important to have somebody experienced like yourself working it, because it doesn't seem like it's a simple thing. It sounds a little complicated, to be completely honest with you, unless you have experience like you've seen enough. But tell us more about that, because I'm sure it gets more complicated when kids are in the process.
Mm-hmm.
And what does that look like?
So the interesting part is, in custody issues, we are probably very much like California and probably very much like most states. The court looks at just one thing, what's in the child's best interest, right? And it's one thing, but it's not necessarily easy to decide, right?
Yeah.
What's in the child's best interest? It's sort of this existential sort of concept. What's best for a child? Different people can have different ideas of what that is. We do have a statute, of course, that deals with what we look at in determining what's in a child's best interest. And that also addresses, that statute has a bunch of factors. 12 factors. And again, we won't go through them all, but it's things like, look, if the child is old enough and mature enough, then we listen to what the child has to say. Does the child have a preference? We usually don't look at a child's preference until they're probably a teenager.
Okay.
The rule is, are they of sufficient age and maturity to have an intelligent decision on that? Okay. No bright and fast rule as to what that means. In some cases, the courts have given 12-year-olds a big say in what they do. In other cases, the courts have looked at a 16-year-old and said, look, given your grades and you're getting in trouble in school all the time, you're skipping school, you're not responsible or mature enough to even be making this decision, right? Yeah. Ultimately, until they're 18, they don't get to call the shots, but the court will take their preference into account if they're old and mature enough to do that. The other thing we look at is things like, logistics. One, is if one parent has always been working, are they able to have the child with them for more than 50% of the time, or at least 40% of the time? So logistics play a role there. We look at what kind of conflict there is between the parents. We take a look at, has there been any domestic violence? And those can be tough situations, right? So again, like with alimony, it's a series of factors that the court has to take a look at and kind of weigh and balance and see, all right, this is what's in the child's best interest. I'll say this. A misconception that the court has, that a lot of people have, not the courts at this point, but a lot of people say, the mom's going to get custody of the child. And I get clients that come in and they say that, I don't even see why I should fight. The mom wants custody. The courts always favor the mom, right?
Yeah.
And that is not true, not by a long shot. And by statute, it cannot be true. Oh. So our statute, first of all, has what's called a legal preference for joint physical custody. And that legal preference arises if the parent that's asking for it has at least shown that they've tried to develop a relationship with the child. So the vast majority of cases, that preference is going to exist, and it's going to sort of underline the entirety of the case. So if the other parent wants to move away from joint physical custody because they want the vast majority of the time with the child, they kind of have to pull the court away from that joint physical custody by showing, there's been domestic violence, or, this person has tried to abduct the child in the past. One of the factors is the health and mental health of the parents. Usually when we talk about that factor, we talk about things like drug use, alcohol abuse, and things of that sort. And it's usually in those cases where we're seeing primary physical custody, or where logistically one parent just isn't able to have at least 40% of the time with the child. Then it's a primary physical custody case. But the vast majority of cases where there's a contested custody issue, we're going to be looking at joint physical custody these days because of that statute. And to be fair, it's I guess, relatively new statute that came out that provided for that preference before, there was other issues at play.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad you brought that up because I totally had that misconception. My parents got divorced like 30 years ago, and it was my understanding too that the mother typically, has a little bit more say when it comes to that. So, and I know. I guess not to talk too much about my parents, but I know that was some of my father's fears when he was going through that process. So that's good to hear because I honestly did not know that. Say, and that's good to know with the joint. Say the child is young, under 10 years old, and maybe one of the parents wants to relocate and bring the child. How does that work?
So we have a lot of those cases, relocation cases. Again, we deal with a variety of factors that the court has to weigh and balance. So first, the court looks at, all right, what is in the child's best interest? First and foremost, that's the court's sole consideration. And in looking at that, we first look at all those custody factors, right? Okay. We also look at if there's someone relocating and there's already been an order providing for custody. So let's say a divorce took place 5 years ago and the parties were provided with joint physical custody. So you have to do two things. One, you have to show to the court why it's better for you to have primary physical custody than the other parent that isn't relocating. And two, you have to provide the court with a basis for why the move should even happen. Is there a good faith basis for the move? You can't just move because you want to keep the child away from the other parent, right? Okay. There has to be some reason why you're moving. Is there going to be some kind of an actual advantage to you and to the child for moving? Are you getting a new job? Is you advancing your career? Is the child going to have better educational opportunities? Are they going to be near extended families? Things like that. You got to present all of this to the court, and the judge will have the unenviable job of saying this child is moving, sometimes thousands and thousands of miles away from the other parent or not. The Supreme Court has come down and said pretty emphatically, look, we don't use children to essentially entrap a parent into never being able to leave Las Vegas. But at the same time, we have to make sure that if we are going to let them leave, that there is some sort of reasonable alternate visitation schedule that you can provide to the other parent. Because while we don't want to force a parent to stay here by using the child as sort of like a shackle, we also don't want to allow a child to leave and suddenly completely lose the relationship they have with the other parent. And it's a lot of weighing and balancing, and that's why you need good attorneys to be able to present all of that to the judge, to be able to show the judge why, when you put all these things on the scales, why the scale falls on your client's side.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's good. Okay, that's very interesting.
Yeah. It's interesting that you pointed out that, a young child, right, 10 years old, and back when your parents were going through that process, it may very well have been that the judges at that point and in your particular state were looking at the mom being the more appropriate caretaker. One thing that is often looked at is who was the child's primary care provider throughout that child's life. And oftentimes that happens to be the mom. Less and less these days as more and more, dual income households have come into play. But certainly go back 20 years and 20, 30 years, and that was not the case, right? There was many, many more single income families, which meant dad was at work all the time and mom's out at the home with children. Right. I don't say that, because it's always dad working, but
I know what you mean.
80s, 90s, certainly that was the case. And so you start forming these perceptions.
Yeah.
The law was also, and this is probably quite a bit older, but there used to be something called the tender years doctrine, which we've since done away with, and most, if not all, jurisdictions have since done away with, which used to say that up to a certain age, the child was better off with their mom, right? It's a boy needs his mother, right? That kind of thing. And that was based off of some studies in those days that tended to show that there was this relationship between a child and their mom at up to a certain age, that the child would benefit more from being with their mom. But since then, that research has evolved, and it has shown that the best thing for children is to have both of their parents in their lives. We had a judge on the bench a while ago. He has since long retired, but he would say, look, the best thing for your child was for both of you to stay together and have the child live with both of you forever. But that's not possible, and it isn't always possible. And we have to deal with the reality that what we do in family court is always going to be the second best thing for the child. At best, we're going to do the second best thing for the child. And, you know, we all have to come to terms with that. The parents I deal with have to come to terms with that. And all you can do is do your best to minimize the harm.
Yeah, it's great to hear, because I was honestly ignorant to all this, to be completely honest with you. My parents got divorced 30 years ago. I was 10 years old. I don't even know why I brought the 10, but I was actually 10 years old.
Okay.
But it's really good to hear that the law has evolved, because I've seen some really great fathers and mothers. It goes on both sides. So it's good to hear that's evolved. Do you see down the road the law evolving another maybe 5-10 years? Is there anything you see in the future with divorce?
Gosh, I
child
hope so.
custody?
I hope so. And to some extent, you know, it has been, because it's had to. Yeah. COVID threw all sorts of wrenches into the works. And, you know, we now have things like video calls that we can, it makes maintaining those connections a lot easier. And we provide for that. We also have the reality of those two-parent households. Where can family law continue to evolve? Here in Nevada, the big thing everyone always hopes gets changed is the rules regarding alimony, because it's so subjective and it's so complicated, and it's so easy to get wrong. But we're unlikely to see those changes anytime soon. It's just not a priority for the legislature. And it's tough for attorneys to take the time to get to the legislature. There are some attorneys that are doing fantastic work up there. But until that does, we have the system that we're working with, and we can just do our best to work within it.
Okay. Well, sounds like it's really important to have a very experienced attorney like yourself. So. Yeah. So besides attorney life, going through, you got a tough, stressful job. Besides being a lawyer, tell us more about you. You know, what do you do for fun? You know.
Sure. I'm a family man. My wife, also an attorney, also works extremely hard, and we have 2 little ones at home, a 10-month-old and a 3-year-old, and they take up. Thankfully, they take up most of my time. Yeah. I try to get out and golf. I used to golf twice a month at least. Yeah. You know, now if I can get a round in every couple of months, I feel lucky. But I love getting out there. As terrible as I am at the game, I love it. And hopefully, as the kids get a little bit older, I'll get a little bit more playtime, and maybe I buy the little ones some set of clubs here.
There you go. That's fun. Yeah. I love golf too, but I literally haven't played like in a year.
We gotta get out.
And I don't have kids. I don't have a good excuse. So.
We'll call it networking. We'll expense it.
Yes, it sounds good. On an Amex card for sure. Yep. So your wife's attorney too.
Yeah.
How is that? Do you guys talk shop a lot, or are you able to like, hey, go into husband dad mode? Is it? You know, how does that work? Because my parents were both in real estate. They were both real estate brokers. And
interesting.
There was, you know, I'm sure you go through it having a wife who's in the same field.
So we met in law school. We've been together since, and you know, it works out. The good thing is you understand the long hours. When something comes up at work, you understand if you got to drop everything and get to that. And so I get it when she has to do it. She gets it when I have to do it, and that makes life a lot easier to have someone that understands that. She's also brilliant, a brilliant attorney, and you know, whenever I have an issue. I can talk through things with her, nice. Ethical issues, which come up every now and then. We talk through those types of things a lot. So awesome partner to have, quite frankly.
Cool.
Steph? Appreciate it.
Well, it sounds like you got best of the both worlds here. So,
I've been lucky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
well, we're going to wrap this up. I want to thank Elon for being on the podcast today. Guys, if you need legal advice, this guy's your man. This is Running Vegas, John McNamara. Take care of yourselves today.
Thank you, John.